First, we have the amazing Rain Leander in our first TheirStory. If you don't know Rain, there's definitely someone who I would invite to a dinner party that I would have with a bunch of, they always ask the question, who would you invite to a dinner party, dead or alive? And Rain would be one of those people, because they're surely have a lot of stories, even more than the one they're about to tell, including one about skydiving with the Queen. I want to pick your brain about that, Rain. During the day, they are a developer advocate at Equinix, but there's so much more. So let's give a hand to Rain.
Thank you, Emily. You are awesome. And thank you so much, C#. I have been pronouncing it C# everywhere, but I'm trying C#. And yeah, I just wanted to say hello. And yes, we are starting with a TheirStory. This is normally a track about her story. I wanted to say thank you, but also put that caveat in. My pronouns are they, them. I was born with a uterus, but my identity, my preferred pronouns are they, them, and my identity is non-binary. If you have any questions around that, I'm happy to answer them, what it's like to be non-binary in tech. It's a lot like this, where you can be an ally to women and men, and there are other things to say. There are other stories around that, but today is not about necessarily being non-binary as much as how I started coding, how I got to be a developer advocate at Equinix. Equinix Metal specifically, it's a little section within Equinix. And yeah, and I hope today to encourage others to dive into coding, to get going, even if your background is something you think is completely opposite of coding, like maybe dance. Because I always thought that to get into coding, you had to have, professionally, that you had to have a CS degree. And I'm here to tell you, nope. Because when I was dancing professionally, yes, that's me. Those all three are me. Very young, 10, 15 years ago. Good life. I was struggling. I'm talking to you from Groningen in the Netherlands, but I am an American. I grew up in the States and I dance professionally in the States. And if you dance professionally in the States, or frankly have any artistic endeavors, it's hard. You can work 80-hour weeks and be barely getting by. Especially if you're in New York City, where the rent is particularly high. I have an undergrad in dance. When I was very, very young, I started dancing for a dancer, I was 14 when I started dancing. And at 14, because you know everything when you're 14, I knew that I wanted to dance professionally when I grew up. And I stuck with that for years and years and years. And it wasn't until I was very bitter and angry that I retired. But here's what I want to tell you while I was dancing. I happened to find myself in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was a woman who was a professional web developer. And I said, how did you get started? Did you have a CS? Do you have a CS degree, or are you self-taught? Back then, and I'm dating myself a little bit, this is the late 90s, there were not so many boot camps. There were no MOOCs at all. And I said, how do you do what you tell me? Tell me your things. And she said, here's the website. I taught myself, completely self-taught. And I was like, what? And so I taught myself a couple of languages, HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of PHP. And I started bartering for services while I danced. I had a full-time during the day thing that I would do, like either receptionist or secretary, data entry, something like that. And then I ran a full dance company, and I would need things like rehearsal space, performance space, costumes, lighting design. And I would go to people and I would say, hey, would you like a website? And often they would say, yeah. And I said, how about 3 months of rehearsal space, Monday through Friday, blah, 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 and I will build you a website. And they would often say yes. This is completely outside of the US taxation department. I don't recommend necessarily following the system, but this is what I did, and it worked. This is how I survived as a dancer in the US. Here's the thing, is that all you need to get started in coding is, well, frankly, the internet and a computer. But besides that, you need to want it. And frankly, if you want it, you will find the time, you will find the space, you will find the resources, the MOOCs, the boot camps, you will find your learning style, all of that. But there are only two things that I really take away from learning. And that is that professionally, in what I do now and what I did in engineering, I've done a lot of coding. You need to know how to Google or research otherwise. You need to know when to stop researching and ask for help. And you need to be very comfortable with making mistakes. The thing about learning as an adult, or after we consider ourselves an adult, is that we don't like to mess up in open, right? The thing that kids can do better than we can, adults, is they can fall and get back up and keep going when they're learning something, how to ride a bike, how to swim, all of it. They can make those mistakes and keep going. So I want you to make mistakes, make a mess, learn from it, and keep going. Those are the two things. Google, make a mistake, conquer the world. It's fine. So no, you don't need a CS degree. Now, how did I go from dancing to coding on the side and coding on the side to actually coding full-time? Well, where were you on 9/11? I was a receptionist, and I was no judgment on receptionists, but I was bored out of my mind. I was pretty miserable 40 hours a week. When I was sitting and answering calls and checking mail and bringing guests to other people. It was not my jam, but it paid the bills, and it paid the bills so that I could dance full time and whatnot. And it was at a control room group. So they had massive conferences with like huge television screens. And when 9/11 started, everyone in our building came to our conference center to watch what was happening. And so it was on this huge TV screen, bigger than me, that we witnessed live the second plane going into the buildings. And all I could think, I was staring at the top of these buildings and watching that plane and watching people jump out of windows. And all I could think was, what if I was a receptionist right there today? And I realized I did not want to die doing this. And 40 hours a week is a long it's a long time to be risking your life, those 40 hours. And I thought, no more. My second lesson is, if you're miserable, stop it. If you want, here's the thing, is that this community day is for people who are typically jumping into tech, having done something else. If you are doing something else that is outside of tech and you are joining tech to find a better way, please do it sooner rather than later. There's no reason to be miserable 40 hours a week or even 30 hours a week. Or frankly, there's no reason to be miserable, right? So that's why I jumped in to get my master's in IT. And I want to step back for a second and say that I got my master's in IT from the American Intercontinental University in Sandy Springs, and I highly recommend not doing that. It was the option I had for me at the time that was the quickest certification. It was $80,000 and I just paid it off last year. It's been 20 years since I got that master's. But what that certification did for me, which is the same thing any certification will do, is it opened doors. People, when I applied to jobs, they no longer saw an undergrad in dance and not a lot of experience. They saw a master's in IT and they were willing to start that conversation. And that's why I got that master's. It didn't teach me anything new. I actually had self-taught myself. I had self-taught a lot of what was in the curriculum already. The only thing that they gave me besides the piece of paper was self-confidence to apply to those jobs. Immediately after, I became a support engineer with a Windows company. And shortly after that, I joined Red Hat. And whew, that's history. So please, if you are miserable, stop doing it and find what makes you happy. We don't need to angle on the darkness of what if I died today, would I appreciate what I'm doing right now? But what if you had $1 million to do whatever you wanted to do? What would you do? Do it. Okay, so I'm breaking rules a little bit. Please don't tell my partner. We do not normally put our kids on the internet. This is my firstborn. And if you live in the Netherlands and you have a child, you are allowed to declare part-time. I was working at Red Hat. I was a technical account manager. And if I'm honest, I was kind of not happy doing what I was doing. But I also wanted to see if I wanted to do this parenting thing full-time or part-time or find the balance. And thankfully, I live in a country that allows you to explore that. And so when this adorable... he's like 2 in this picture. When this guy was born 6 years ago, I said, let's explore. And I went back to those coding lessons, those tutorials. I kind of looked at my coding experience, which was HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript. It was at this point 5-7 years old. And so frankly, that knowledge, this was way before HTML5. This was OG HTML. So I knew that I was going to have to go back. And I noticed I found all the MOOCs that are there, and I found Django girls and Rails girls. And I started going to these workshops, and I remembered, oh yeah, I love to code. And like, I'll get into the zone where I'm just like, and time will pass and it's a beautiful thing. And I was like, you know what? I want to code, but also you may notice that I dance. I wanted to start speaking in public at tech conferences. And I was like, how hard could this be? I'm a performer. And so I started applying to tech conference. So in the meantime, of course, in the Netherlands, you're allowed to go part-time and Red Hat can't fire me. So they were like, all right, your new job is to find a new job, either within Red Hat or outside of it. And I was like, cool, I'm doing this explorations. I'm applying to tech conferences. And I got in. Oh. But then I ended up joining Red Hat Engineering, specifically in OpenStack, specifically in the Python language. And to be very precise, and you can ask me about this later if you want, I worked on the O installer to make it more accessible for the end user using Ansible code. But I also had these 2 conferences that I applied to, and I went to my boss and I was like, hey, cool, ready to be a Python developer, awesome. But also I've got these 2 talks. And he's like, great, go do them. And I do them. I come back and he's like, was that fun? Do you like that? And I was like, I love it. And he goes, go do it some more. Talk about this project. And so for a year, I was in the engineering department, probably coding 50% of the time, but traveling and giving talks and writing blogs. And by the way, this is not necessarily an engineering title. It's a developer relations title, which if you haven't heard of, I'm happy to talk more about, but it's basically where you're good at coding and good at technical things and good at ingesting the technology, but you're also good at public speaking and writing and networking, going to parties and yes, drinking beer. But you can balance those two things, and that is exactly me. And I was very fortunate that Red Hat gave me the space to explore that. So my point with this, with my adorable son, is that you have to be curious, and you can't just you can't necessarily just go, okay, I want to do this, and just go for it. Yes, that's an awesome approach. But for me, I had to be curious and be like, I wonder if I would enjoy XYZ, and then go try and do that. And if you maintain that curiosity, which goes back to the making mistakes and being like a child, you will be very successful in finding your happiness and not being miserable. So here's the part where we get to kind of uncomfortable talk. I know we talked about 9/11, but this to me is even scarier. And that is compensation negotiation. It wasn't until, and I realized I gave you a picture of Arthur, but I didn't give you a picture of my twins. And that's because the twins are 3 and they can't actually give me permission to use their photo yet. It will happen. A couple of years ago, we were trying to have a second child and nothing was happening, by the way. And I went to the doctors and they were like, you can't actually have kids. Nothing's going on. And Arthur's a miracle. And I was like, and by the way, this is insight to who I am. When the doctor said, you can't, I stopped listening, crossed my arms, and I went, you watch. Now, in the Netherlands, after a certain age, by the way, I'm 44, after a certain age and a certain level of hormones, they won't give you any kind of assistance for having a child. It's just not done. And so my options were to adopt, to ask someone else, or to keep trying. And my partner and I decided to keep trying. And then we were pregnant with twins. So I guess we told the doctors. But having not 1, not 2, but 3 children means that your expenses don't go slightly up. They go a lot up. And all of a sudden, my compensation at Red Hat was not enough. And initially, this is how I tried to ask for a raise. Hey, so I think I've been doing a lot of stuff really good, and I would really appreciate more money. And shockingly, no one listened. And over time, I would ask more aggressively. I would bring up specific, tangible accomplishments as to why I was worth a higher tier than I was currently being paid. And sadly, it didn't work out. So then I started applying to other companies, asking for higher compensation than I had ever thought that I was worth. And here's the thing about negotiating your compensation is 2 things. 1, know what you're worth. And 2, stand firm. And those 2 things are so hard if you were raised with a uterus. Yeah. One of the reasons I figured out what I'm worth is, 1, I did a lot of research on experience levels for industry for what I was doing. So developer relations, the amount of experience I had, plus the amount of programming experience I had. And I talked to people who are working in the industry, who were working in the industry for about the same amount of time that I was. And here's the thing, as a non-binary person, I did not feel limited to speaking only with the women. I spoke to everyone, other non-binary people, women and men. And I was like, how much are you making? Because I'm not. And I discovered that other people within the industry were making double, triple, and quadruple what I was making. I also discovered the average income for the Netherlands and was actually kind of disappointed. The Dutch income for ITC, it's called here, is very low. But part of that is because normally you don't have a student loan like $80,000. And also you might not have 3 kids. And so I realized that I needed to get employed by a large remote company that was willing to pay me for experience rather than location. So that. Second, stand firm. There were so many jobs that I interviewed for that were perfect for me that I had to turn down because the pay was not comparable to my goal. And it was almost heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. It wasn't almost. It was heartbreaking. I was heartbroken to turn away from those moments. But the whole reason why I was searching for a new opportunity was not because I was unhappy, but because every month we were dipping into our savings account. It was a specific situation that was specifically compensation based. And so I stuck to my goal. Now, here's the other thing, and maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I'm going to, just between you and me, is that when I got my first offer from Equinix, on the inside, I was like, "Wah!" But on the outside, in the viewfinder, I went, okay. But that's a little bit disappointing because I said that I needed my base compensation to be X. It was so hard. It was so hard, and it will be so hard. That's the thing about negotiation, is that here's the thing. You can practice negotiating with anything, and it doesn't have to be your income. It can be, well, it doesn't have to be your job. You can go to free markets and negotiate the price you're going to pay for something. And this is when you can practice staying firm, keeping a smile, and not backing down. And the thing is that you have to be willing to walk away. And it's, yeah, I'm not going to say it again. I'm saying it again. It's so hard, but you can do it. This is a thing you can do. You can be curious. You can make mistakes and learn from them. You can figure out how to Google and when to ask questions, and you can become a coder. And I hope that you've learned something from this. I hope you're inspired to go out and play and find your new adventure. and to negotiate for what you're worth, because you are so worth it. Yes? So let me know what questions you have. And thank you so much for today's opportunity.
Thanks so much, Rain. I'll kick it off with a couple of questions on my end. I would say, let me ask a hard question, I think. And again, Rain, we've already talked about this, but feel free if you're not comfortable speaking about it. But has being non-binary affected your career either positively or negatively? I feel that with being non-binary, I can imagine you're naturally more open-minded than others, in the sense that you did have the wherewithal to move from being a dancer, which is like as far from tech as one can possibly be. But in some ways, yeah, just wanted to see in your own experience, what that was like.
It doesn't make life easier. Let's start out with that. It's not like you're going closer to the male gender and therefore flipping a switch in your brain, and all of a sudden you can be aggressive and you can have the confidence of a white boy and all that stuff. It doesn't make things easier. It actually makes things much harder. And first of all, I want to add a caveat, is that when I speak as a non-binary person, I'm still only speaking as myself, and everyone has a different experience and viewpoint and whatnot. And it also makes a difference, I think, if you were born with gonads or if you were born with a uterus. That said, it's a transgender. You don't live in the gender that you relate to. And so there's a lot of psychology around that, of figuring out your own truth. I actually knew that I was non-binary in the late 90s, right around when I started coding, because I was playing this live action role play. It's a game, and somebody came up to me, a plot person wanted to create this NPC, this non-player character, who was so ancient and beyond our realm that they were genderless. And he specifically said to me, "I feel like you could pull it off." And I said, "Yes. And also, I wish I had a label for that, because that's who I am, really. Not that I'm ancient and beyond gender." But that was when my brain started going, wait, so woman and man. This was the late 90s. Thank you to millennials who started these dialogues, who were like, you know what? Gender is a construct. And I was like, oh, yes, it is. Like, kind of thing. And I didn't come out of the closet and start asking people to use the they, them pronoun until like 5 years ago, which was right when I was giving birth to kids and asking them to call me mama. And so it was like I was doing the epitome of what it means to be a woman in our society, which is bullshit, by the way. You do not have to have kids to be a woman, according to cultural norms. And I was also saying, I'm not a woman. I'm non-binary. I'm queer. I am not just my uterus. And so, but within tech, there are not a lot of us. Strangely, within DevRel, there are a lot of us. And I think it has to do with DevRel, developer relations. You're more in touch with the psychology of people and relationships. And so you're more likely to think about yourself as well as others and your relationship to them. And so that I've actually, my experience is that there are a lot more alternative gender is a construct, kind of non-binary people within DevRel. That said, I wish there were, it's not that I wish there were more people who are non-binary. It's that I wish that tech was a safer space for people to say and be whoever they want to be. And that to me is more important than being non-binary or not being binary, you know, or being woman or man or anything else.
Makes a lot of sense. Great, thank you for that answer. I have a couple questions from the audience. So first one is, what do you recommend for finding that stopping point for those times when you don't know how to do something and spend time researching in a work environment?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I started, like, where I started from was like hours and days lost before I would ask, like forever. And what actually started flipping me over to ask sooner is escape rooms. Okay. So if you've never done an escape room, it's a typically 1 hour timed space in real life that you are locked into and you have to solve a bunch of puzzles to get out. Here's the thing is that while I was traveling, I actually don't drink beer. And so you find that when you travel, you need to kind of have a second hobby to be like, relax. And I would go and do escape rooms wherever I traveled. And so one year I did 47 escape rooms, and I don't recommend doing 47 escape rooms, but I do recommend kind of giving yourself a time limit to where if you can't figure it out in 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, you ask someone. It's an automatic thing. Just, nope, time's up, let's go. And to me, there's also by the way, there's also this, it's called decoding. And it's this thing where you tell someone else who can't argue or actually ask questions at all. And you tell the duck, okay, I've got this bug on line 42, and it should be returning a true or a false, but it's only returning integers. Oh yeah. So if it's returning integers versus blah, 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 and it's where you figure it out on your own, and it's called decoding. So this is a form of asking. That's a thing. But also give yourself time. You've tried decoding, you've gone for a walk or had a cup of tea, then ask questions. And that's the thing is I didn't get good at that until I did a series of escape rooms where there's a short time limit and you have to deliver by a certain time. Hopefully you will not figure that out under a you're fired situation, but it has to do with figuring it out yourself. Where is your time limit?
Yeah, so like setting boundaries for yourself, essentially, in all the ways, I suppose.
In all the ways.
In all the ways. I guess that leads to another question about when you were talking about negotiations, especially for salaries. And so how do you have any key reasoning points to use while negotiations, while you're in the negotiation period to really drive being paid for experience over location?
So being paid for experience over location is a dialogue you can start all the way with the HR and the recruiters. That's something you ask right away. And you ask, do you pay based on location or experience? And frankly, if they're like, what do you mean? Make sure that you know, I have 11 years in the tech industry, 15 years within I've been specialized in open source for 5 years, and I specifically have infrastructure experience for 8 years. Therefore, I am worth. And that starts all the way from the beginning. You don't want to get all the way to the end of a intensive, especially within tech. We have to like jump through all these hoops and prove that we're technical and whiteboard and all this crap. We don't want to do that to get to the end and find out, oh, they pay based on location and it's not enough. You want to start at the beginning. Now, here's the thing is that if you don't have that experience, if you can't say, I have 10 years in the industry, you say, well, I have watched 3 MOOCs and I've been volunteering within open source for 2 months. You're not going to find their pay on experience is going to be lower than the pay on location. So it comes after a little bit of time. But yeah, talk with them right away.
Yeah, I think we also have a panel later on. This is some self-promotion on self-advocacy, and I think this is in line with that, where basically you have to learn how to like you were saying with the borders for yourself and boundaries. It's the same kind of thing where you're okay, what is the threshold I'm willing to accept, and let's work from there, as opposed to just kind of taking whatever's thrown at you, because that's generally not going to benefit you as opposed to the employer. I think we have room for one more question. Tessa asked, I did not negotiate my last salary since the month after that I would have been out of a job because of the contract ending. How would you negotiate in a situation like that? I guess where you're sort of perceiving yourself as at a lower end of the spectrum, if you will.
So after you've already started, there are a couple of things in there. And one is that if you have already started, it is much more difficult to negotiate a raise or a promotion after. Companies may have very strict policies about only giving a 15% raise, which is bullshit. But it behooves you more to negotiate at the beginning, because once you've started, the bump ups are going to be far in between, no matter what company you work for. And second, if you're in a contractor situation, you can negotiate just as much as if it's a permanent situation. Especially in the Netherlands, every job seems to start with a temporary contract anyway, even if you know that it's a permanent position, but you're going to have like a 1-year contract initially. So treat them all like permanent. It's negotiation starts, do it before you start, step in. Now, you have a bit of an advantage if you are a 3-month contractor or whatnot, in that for those 3 months, you work your butt off. And then as your contract is ending, you can say, look, you can hire someone else, or you have me who has this experience with your product and can do X, Y, Z, have specific examples, but I need a raise of blah, 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 10%, 15%, 1,000 euros, whatever it is. And remember that it's not just about compensation necessarily. For me, it very much was. But you can negotiate for vacation, for benefits, for so many things are negotiable. Flexible work hours, which is priceless. Lots of options there.
Cool. Thank you so much.